There was a big development today regarding the China situation, which is the collective name we'll just call China in the news at the moment. China situation, China-West relations. There's any number of titles that could be put on that. But it's a big development. I won't read out the whole BBC article because it's quite long, but it did catch my attention. Western countries sanction China over rights abuses. And this is the article doesn't say who the reporter is. Several Western countries have imposed sanctions on officials in China over rights abuses against the mostly Muslim Uyghur minority group. China has detained Uyghurs at camps in the northwest region of Xinjiang, where allegations of torture, forced labour, and sexual abuse have emerged. Sanctions were introduced as a coordinated effort by the European Union, the UK, the US, and Canada. China responded with its own sanctions on European officials. Of course, they've no reason for that other than just revenge. It has denied the allegations of abuse, claiming the camps are re-education facilities used to combat terrorism. But the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the treatment of Uyghurs amounted to an appalling violation of the most basic human rights. The EU has not imposed sanctions on China over human rights abuses since the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, when troops in Beijing opened fire on pro-democracy protesters. What do we know about the sanctions? The sanctions, including travel bans and asset freezes, target senior officials in Xinjiang who've been accused of serious human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims. Those targeted have been named as Chen Mingguo, the director of the Xinjiang Public Security Bureau, the local police force; Wang Mingshan, a member of Xinjiang's Communist Party Standing Committee, who the EU says holds a key political position in charge of overseeing the detention of Uyghurs; Wang Jucheng, party secretary of the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, a state-owned economic and paramilitary organization; former deputy Communist Party head in Xinjiang, Zhu Hailun, who is accused of having a key political position in overseeing the running of the camps; and the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps Public Security Bureau, which is in charge of implementing XP, that's Xinjiang People's CC, Communist Party or Communist. Takes time to get used to all these CCP acronyms, policies on security matters, including the management of detention centres. Mr. Raab called the abuse of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang one of the worst human rights crises of our time. So, from my perspective, this is kind of the other side of the coin to the video I made the other day, in which I was quite critical, and very concerned about this focus on trade in the comprehensive security overview that Boris Johnson, I think it was called the Integrated Security Review that Boris Johnson commissioned. I still believe that there are concerns about that. I still am concerned about the rhetoric on the importance of trade with China. Um, but this is something. One observation is it's an area where we can work with the EU. Obviously, relations are strained over the vaccines and over Brexit, but this is an area where we have mutual interests with our European neighbours of France, Germany, the Netherlands, every European country. And if a small country like Lithuania can stand up to China, as they did when they sent junior ministers in place of the Prime Minister and President to a forum that China had organised for Eastern and Central European states, as a way of saying we're not going to just pander to your wishes. If a country like Lithuania can stand up to China, we've got no excuse. Um, I welcome this. Of course, there's going to be reprisals. Of course, the CCP will lash out, but they're going to lash out anyway. This idea that if we show weakness and then we just sit on the fence, it'll all be nice. Well, that happened in the so-called golden era of Cameron and Osborne. At the time, I think it was Global Times that actually praised Osborne. They said this is how Western politicians should respond to China. In other words, give us what we want. Um, I think what's happening now is they're kind of like a cornered dog. And a cornered dog can be dangerous. The thing about China, I think sometimes we can overstate its power. What I mean by that is Yes, it's a powerful country, a very powerful country, and we certainly cannot underestimate it. We can't underestimate the confidence of the CCP and the power that Xi Jinping personally has. That's all true. Nevertheless, I don't think that the power is without limit. I think that the more enemies China makes, and it's doing a pretty good job of doing that. Only a few days ago, it had a fishing flotilla that was aggravating the Philippines, not for the first time. Um, the more countries they polarize, the harder it's going to be to win international hearts and minds. So a lot of people might not like or trust the United States, but it might be a case that they don't like or trust China either. Um, but I'm under no illusions. The challenge is massive, and one could look at the 1930s or the Cold War. I think both of those periods have some echoes of what's going on today. The 1930s, insofar as there was widespread appeasement of a totalitarian regime that was doing what it liked, and people, maybe with good intentions, but who were extremely wrong, felt that appeasing that would be historically the right outcome. It would help it to reform. Well, as we know, that didn't happen with the Third Reich. I am not saying that China is about to start a world war, but what's happening in Xinjiang does fit all the hallmarks of the definition of genocide. The forced sterilization of Uyghur women, for example, um, the forced sinicization of the area to try and purge Uyghur culture. That's very much like it has echoes of forget the term that the Nazis used, but it's to do with space. There was the German word for that, I forget now, but it was an excuse the Nazis used for uh, taking land, basically, in German speaking areas. Um, of course, in Xinjiang, it's not Han culture. It's very much a Central Asian Turkic culture. Um, but there's a lot more to do. I mean, of course, Uyghur activists they welcome it, but they say it doesn't go far enough. I can understand that because I can understand their critique because, as they would see it, we shouldn't be trading with this regime at all. Now, unfortunately for governments, foreign policy can't just be dictated on human rights issues. However, it's not just human rights issues, it's also our own national security. That's why I'm so uncomfortable with the trade issue. Because by this sort of rhetoric, like we need to rely on Chinese trade, we need to get deeper ties. No, no, it just strikes me as setting us up for a very precarious situation where we could be blackmailed, because China will invest billions and then we can't really speak out against them. And it's not the first time this country has been in a kind of situation where we've been at the whim of a more powerful country. Although the other time I'm thinking of was with an ally in the post-war years when we were reliant on the United States because of the massive loans that they'd given us. Now that was with an ally, and that was awkward. So if that was the situation with the United States, imagine the sort of situation we would be in if we are overly reliant on an adversary. Um, I think Johnson is making the same mistake as a lot of his predecessors, and it's infuriating. I can understand Tory backbench MPs being angry about it, but it's kind of a dual approach here because, on the other hand, it is Johnson's government that is imposing these sanctions. So I don't want to be too critical, but I just think he's wrong about the trade issue to put so much focus on that. I mean, there's a lot of emerging economies, they might not all have glowing human rights records either. But Indonesia is not going to be a security threat to this country. India is not going to be a security threat to this country. There's a host of Brazil isn't going to be a security threat to this country. We'll have our differences, but I think the situation with China is unique, and that's why I think we are. It's a mistake to be far too reliant on them. Um, China's also thinking that this is just the Five Eyes. Well, this is an area we can work with Europe on. You know, Western Europe's not part of the Five Eyes, but they have a vested interest in standing up to China. So does many parts of Asia. China actually, in that sense, starts to look more volatile. It's a powerful country, but can they take on everyone? I'm not convinced they can. What true friends does China actually have? Pakistan? Well, it's very clear that that's a geopolitical thing. Pakistan wants to bulwark to India, but ideologically, they've pretty much nothing in common. You know, one is a communist state, the other is an Islamic state. I mean, Pakistan's silence on the Uyghur issue is pathetic, but it's pretty obvious why they are that way. North Korea, little tin pot dictatorship. It's not a powerful country. It's an erratic regime and potentially dangerous regime, but it's not powerful in the way that China is. Russia, that's significant. But is it a true friendship or is it just a useful geopolitical alliance? Russia doesn't pose the same economic threat, and they're far more forthright in their uh, security threat to the West. And, you know, I think Russia operates in a different way. Russia doesn't try to hide its animosity. China is far more manipulative in that sense. Um, I think we need to take both Moscow and Beijing very seriously. Russia's also a powerful country, but the economic factor is much, much stronger with the China question. Economics is not a major issue with Russia. Russia's like the 11th or 12th biggest economy. That's not a major factor. China's second, so it is. Also, there's very few Russian students in British universities. It's not, again, that's a dynamic that, you know, I think we need to consider more because I think that China will use that sort of soft power technique, for example, by stoking up the diaspora. Now, I always am very careful about how I say this. I am not talking about collective punishment and stigmatizing of Chinese people, but I do think we need to be a bit more robust and assertive in what CCP is doing. So when they accuse us of interfering in China's internal affairs, we need to throw straight back at them. We see the way you try to stoke up your students with nationalism. We need to take action. For example, if Chinese students bully their Hong Kong peers, they need to be expelled. We need to tell them that they're paying a lot of money to study here. They're guests, and they should get what comes with that. But we have to make it clear that they are guests, and as such, they're not here to act as CCP puppets. Frankly, we need to, I think, have a lot of vetting of this new embassy because it's been described as a potential nest of spies. We definitely need to have a serious look at the Confucius Institutes. I think they need to be closed. I think university departments need to be heavily pressurized by the government. I would withdraw funding from them. If I was the education secretary, I would threaten to withdraw funding unless they answered to their ties to Beijing. And it's not just a case of being naive and having these glowing appraisals of relationships, like East-West relationships. I'm talking about actual security issues. There's been reports recently that British academics are actually working with Chinese counterparts with ties to the military in China. And they say that they're doing it from honest intentions and they don't understand the implications. Well, they're either incredibly stupid or they're just greedy. They're doing it for the money, for investment. If it's the latter, then there might be a case that these people are actually committing treason if they are working with a hostile foreign state in military areas. That's something we need to take extremely seriously. And I think those professors need to face heat and scrutiny for their ties. We need to know exactly what the nature of those relationships are. Um, Ofcom done the right thing getting rid of CGTN. It was overdue, but it was the right thing to do. That was a big victory. So there are things coming through which are good, but um, I still think there's other areas that we need to look at. I think when they insult us, we need to throw insults straight back at them. Not necessarily in a petulant way, but we certainly shouldn't take their lies. Um, we definitely shouldn't tolerate wolf warrior diplomacy. I think when our ambassador was hauled up for, you know, to be told off, basically, I think we should have made a public rebuke of that. Um, as far as I know, Johnson and Raab didn't. I'm sure they would have been on the phone to her, but I think that's the sort of situation where we should have been a bit more vocal. Um, we shouldn't be shy of publicly saying what we believe. For example, in China's attitude to Hong Kong, I think there's a lot of areas we need to be more robust. And finally, from a domestic point of view, we need to challenge the useful idiots who still think it could be business as normal, who still push this idea that if only we give China what it wants, then they'll change, that it'll just be fine. Their naivety has been exposed time and time again. China hasn't changed as it's got more powerful and more as its economy has grown. It's only got more arrogant, more assertive, more confident. Um, so I've kind of mixed feelings at the moment. I see some signs that we're doing more. I think the Biden administration has been strong. So much for those Hong Kong groups that claim Beijing Biden is a puppet. The exact opposite has been shown to be true so far. So, they're not helping Kate in the matter by just making up false claims about the president. I really think this is something we need to have a united front on, not just within the Five Eyes, but with Western Europe as well, and with other Asian countries. China needs to be polarized. Am I talking about cut off links 100%? No, that would be pretty much impossible in terms of areas that we do need to work together on. Like I said, I use a scenario if, for example, let's say there was British and Chinese journalists and they were both kidnapped by Islamic fundamentalists in Syria or Yemen or somewhere like that. And both Beijing and London needed to work together to secure the release, something like that. But other than that, I do think we need to distance ourselves. If there's a new Cold War, it's one that China has started. There are still too many people in the West that are going out of the way to play the devil's advocate for Beijing, and I'm sick of it. We need to show strength. It's the only language these thugs understand. And I'm not saying that it will change the way, but at least it sends out a message that we're not going to just be a pushover.